The scripture I've chosen for this evening is Matthew 19, verses 13 through 15. Then little children were being brought to him in order that he may lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples spoke sternly to those who brought them. But Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs." Blessed are those who hear the word of God and believe. At this time, I will turn our presentation over to John for his presentation on Bethany Children's Home and aging out and the resources of Bethany.
Good evening. It's great to be here. It was such a lovely evening for a drive until I got to Route 309 and sat in the parking lot with everyone else. I did make it on time, so I guess I shouldn't complain. And I was really interested in, as Pastor Steve told me, and I don't know that long ago that we talked about this coming up and the topic of aging out, which is something that I might know a little bit about. So I thought, well, it'd be really great to be able to come and share with you at least what I know about it. And of course, I can't go anywhere without talking about Bethany, so forgive me, but that'll happen too. And he said, usually 2.5 hours, so I'm kidding. I could do that, but I won't. Probably just a real quick, maybe just a quick history lesson, a personal history for me. And I have some historical pictures of Bethany, and I just want to say I wasn't there when all of them were taken. It was a really long time ago. But I came to Bethany as a 10-year-old with my parents back in 1966. So that was, some of you don't know that there was a 1966, but there was, trust me. We lived on campus. My dad was the assistant to what was then the superintendent, Garnet Adams, and for some period of time. And when Garnet retired, my father became executive director. They changed titles all the time. But I literally grew up on the grounds. And, I'm having, and I will have some like little kid flashbacks tonight because, and I'm sorry, your last name now is? Geider. But her 4 sons were at Bethany at the same time as I was growing up. And in fact, the 2 older sons were my 2 closest friends growing up at Bethany. Lee was a year ahead of me. We played soccer together. Lynn and I were in the same grade, and we played Little League baseball, and we both struggled with the same nasty English teacher. And sometimes I still have nightmares about that. God bless Lynn for living through that. Anyway, I kind of grew up, went to college, got a master's degree, and I actually worked for a foster care agency from the Fleetwood area for, about 14 years. And then ended up somehow magically back at Bethany as an employee. And I have been at Bethany now for about 18 years, 18 or 19, somewhere between 18 and 19 years, which, as I think about that's kind of frightening, how long I've been around. But I have been in this business of taking care of other people's kids since 1980. So I have an understanding of when you talk about aging out, it's something that, in the work that we were doing, I would experience. And, real simply, what aging out means is kids that are in, and I'll say the foster care system. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean, a foster home in the community, but living not with their own family. So Bethany isn't necessarily, we're not in foster care, we're more of a residential facility, there are group homes. But when I talk about the system, it's all of those kinds of things where kids aren't living with their families. And what often happened is kids would be in the system, and if they stayed in the system until they were 18 and graduated, they went to school and graduated, or turned 18. And depending on the county agency that had the custody of that child, if they turned 18 before they graduated, they would sometimes continue to pay the agency to keep them until they graduated, sometimes not. Then you had maybe the foster parents decide, well, I've committed so much to this child, we're going to keep him, and let him graduate. At Bethany, we did the same thing. If kids were cut off at 18 and they were 3 months to graduation, 4 months, 6 months to graduation, they stayed at Bethany and graduated. But often, then upon graduation, they were expected to leave. And if they didn't have a reasonable family home to return to, where would they go? They go out in the community, and how many 18-year-olds that you know of are prepared to go out and get a job, find a place to live, have some income to be able to do that. It was really a daunting situation. Now, I'm glad to say that at least in Pennsylvania, and this goes on all across the country, and I can't speak to other states that much because I do get around, but not that much. Pennsylvania in the last number of years has recognized that this is a problem, that kids that are in foster care are already at a disadvantage in many ways because maybe of the slow start and the problems that they were having before they were removed from their biological families for whatever reason. So they started to give more services to older kids. And they started to realize that kids need to be taught some specific skills and abilities so that they can go out into the real world. But it still doesn't mean that they're necessarily ready at 18 just because they turned 18, a magical day. They're one day older than the day before. Or that they graduated from high school. And, I graduated from high school a few years back. I wasn't ready to be independent at 18. Sometimes I wonder whether I'm ready to be independent today. In fact, I think that's why I got married. Need somebody to take care of me. And I think the same thing about my sons. I have two sons that are supposedly adults these days. And, they weren't ready for that at 18 either. And they had a mom and dad that they were living with, that they had as resources. Kids in the system, if a county agency is saying, we're done paying for you, and the agency caring for them is saying, well, then you need to leave, where do they go? And if home was a bad enough situation that they weren't able to go back, why is it now magically okay? And yet, unfortunately, for many kids, that was what they had going for them. They're either on their own, so they would end up finding friends, trying to make ends meet, and often not doing very well. Or go back to family situations that weren't necessarily the most positive places, or maybe hadn't changed at all from the time that they left, those bad family experiences. Okay, fortunately, the state has said, all right, we recognize this is a problem. We're really not helping kids. We're doing them a disservice. So they started identifying ways that they could do that, and part of it was just training, providing for certain kinds of information that the kids would be taught so that they'd be better prepared to go out. And I'm going to talk in general, because when I start talking about Bethany, I'll let you know. They've also actually identified additional funds to keep kids in care longer, so that just because they turn 18 doesn't mean they need to leave. And in fact, you can now legally keep a child in care until they're age 21. It has to be voluntary on their part. So, if they're tired of living in foster care and they're saying, I'm out of here, see ya, they can leave. There's nothing you can do to keep them there. And then they will be discharged and payment will stop and everything else. But I think if it's explained to them what the benefits are, most times kids are going to be willing to stay where they're comfortable. And the other thing, a lot of our kids want to go to college, and they're not able to do that without support. I mean, who's going to support them? And for the many of the kids that are at Bethany today, these days, they don't have good family systems to return to. They're lucky, some of our kids, that family even comes to visit them, and they might not be that far away. And it's not that they wouldn't be willing to help their child with college. They don't have the ability. They don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the money to help their child with college. Fortunately, at Bethany, we do have some of that, and we're able to do that. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So there was this kind of hole in the system. You turned 18, you got discharged, out the door, good luck. And I think you've all heard stories about how that turned out for kids. The statistics for kids in foster care who are homeless or in mental health institutions or in jail, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'll tell you they're abysmal. They really were horrible. Way more than 50% of kids in foster care were not, in a suitable living arrangement or were, under the care of some other facility of the state, like being in prison. So at least somebody figured out that things aren't going well. So there's been better developments. I won't tell you the system's perfect, but at least it's working better than it did. Now, I'll talk a little bit about Bethany because we're doing this as well, but this isn't really new, and it might be a different name for an old dog, so to speak. No offense back then. He's a little gray. I didn't know how old he was. For a very long time, kids come to Bethany and literally can stay as long as they need to. We don't ask kids to leave. I mean, the only time a kid is going to leave on our part is if they really are inappropriate and not, working in the program, and for their own safety and the safety of staff and other kids, they can't stay. And that doesn't happen very often, I'm glad to say. But, when they come to us, whether they're 12 or 13 or 14, years ago, they would stay for years. They would come at 6 and 7 and 8, or even as infants. Now we're going back, into the 50s and beyond. They might stay until they graduated from high school. They would have been there a long time. Bethany really became their family, and there were resources available. And we, for a very long time, have been able to help kids with paying for college, and even have them come back to Bethany during breaks at times if they have no place else to go. So we still do that. We're around for almost 149 years. We have an endowment. There are some restricted funds in the endowment that were given to us specifically for higher education. We use those funds to support the kids. Now we make them apply for all the scholarships and grants that they can find. We do like them to take at least minimal loans because it's kind of an incentive for them to do well.
Sure.
Because we'll cover the loan if they graduate. And then we provide a small stipend, and we even provide a monthly spending money because, you got to have money for pizza and soda. You can't go to college without that. I wouldn't have survived. Or Yakko's hot dogs, for that matter. Yeah. I was local. I went to Muhlenberg, so I knew where Yakko's was. But we've always done that. Now, if you have a kid that's not going to college, if they had family to return to when they graduated from high school, plans would be made, we'd send, they'd go back home. Now they're older, and hopefully we've taught them something so that even if they go back into not the greatest environment, they're better prepared to be there. And we still do that today, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But if we had a youth that said, well, I've lived here outside of Wilmelsdorf for the last, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, whatever it was, I'd really rather hang around. We'll help them find a job. Again, these are kids that are not going to college. We'll help them find a job. Then we'll help them find a place to live. And we do it in that order because if we find them a place to live and the job's too far away, that was not time well spent. But we help them find a job. And it could be anywhere between Lebanon and Reading. And then we'll find them a place to live close enough to either public transportation or so they can get there, whether it's a bicycle or some of our kids, if they've been working, they can afford a car. We do help them get a driver's license. We have brave souls that teach our kids how to drive. I always make sure I'm on the second floor, but when they're doing that, I do kid with our kids about that. When they say, I'm going to be going driving, I say, tell me when. Okay, why? Because I want to be upstairs. Be harder for you to run me over if I'm upstairs. We have fun with that. But preparing kids to be out there. Now, when we find them a job and a place to live, and we do encourage our kids to work and we force them to save money, we only give them a small portion of what they earn, and the rest of it we make them put it in savings and a checking account with us. They hate that. They absolutely hate that until they leave. Right. And then we say, here's all your money. And we've had kids leave with $8,000. Then they were pretty happy we made them save it. Yeah. And then we hope it's not gone by Tuesday, too. Right? But we will pay their rent for a couple of months until they have their income coming steadily. We'll work with them, to how do you buy food. You don't go to McDonald's every day. You got to go to a grocery store occasionally. If you want to have money left over at the end of the week, not week left over at the end of the money. And that's something that you can be taught. We've always done this. Because we realize you can't just kick them out the door, with a suitcase and a $10 bill and say good luck and hope that it's going to work. Many, many times over the years that even I've been there, we have kept kids after they were discharged because they had no place to go. And we would work with them to make it work for them. And, did it work every single time? Of course not. But at least we tried. least we tried. And, part of that being a charitable organization, the last thing we want to do is go, yeah, we spent all this time with you. Good luck. See ya. It just wouldn't be right to do that. So that's a historical picture.
One of the things I'd like, and I appreciate you starting off with the aging out and doing that, but I know that when I heard that the UCC had an affiliation with this orphanage, my mind went back to Charles Dickens and the idea of the kids who get dropped off at the orphanage, never to see their parents again, and then I find out that that's not the case. That in fact, and I think where it really came to light for me was when I went to Egypt, and we went to Mother Teresa's orphanage, and we found out that parents there were allowed to drop their children off for a period of 2 to 4 years and come back and get them, especially if they're having issues or problems. And then I'm saying, okay, this is just like Bethany, because I never realized I'm thinking Bethany is an orphanage, a traditional orphanage, and it's not. Or I guess maybe it started off that way, and that's
many years
so
ago.
there's my lead-in or my setup for you to a little bit about how did Bethany come about, and where it's not what we think of a traditional orphanage.
Right. Thanks for asking. He's not a plant at all. I'd like to do a quick Bethany history. A young pastor and his wife in the early 1860s realized that there were kids all over the greater Philadelphia area, and actually they were in Virginia at the time, who needed help, and they had this idea that they might be able to help. Now, actually, he was an immigrant from Germany, and we know from significant research that he actually had this idea when he was still in Germany in the 1850s. But he ended up needing to leave Germany, and that's a story for a whole other day. We found out some interesting stuff. But he came to the United States, and he actually was a missionary in this far-off land called Virginia. It was far off in those days. And the Civil War started. And he was actually cut off from his funding. He was working out of the Philadelphia Synod, I think they called it in those days. And the funding was cut off just because of the war. So he and his family returned to Philadelphia. Now, we have this story at Bethany, full of about 8 watercolor paintings where he happened on the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Antietam, and actually ministered to dying soldiers. And at least one of those soldiers, pulled a picture of his kids out of his pocket and said, "What's going to happen to my kids?" And, this weighed heavily on him as he returned to Philadelphia. I don't know that actually ever happened, or if it's just a really wonderful story that's been perpetuated. It is a wonderful story that's been perpetuated. So we'll let that there. But he did return to Philadelphia with his family, and he started visiting other pastors of churches in Philadelphia. And he got a job initially as the editor of a Sunday school newspaper. Now think about that for a second. A paying job as an editor of a Sunday school newspaper. There were jobs like that in those days. And it was called the Lammerhirte, which is something about the shepherd of the lambs in really poor German translation on my part. And literally was in German. I mean, that was the German Reformed Church. We're talking the 1860s. But he started visiting other pastors and said, "I have this idea. There are kids being orphaned by the Civil War, and we think we can help." And he and his wife were stepping forward to do that. He even went to was it the Carlisle Classis? And I might not be getting these terms right. These are old church terms, which, Philadelphia was part, literally, of the Carlisle area. It was a big synod group. But he got permission to do this with the support of the church. Now, an interesting fact, and some of these facts, actually most of what I'm sharing is factual, and if it's not, I will try and tell you that I'm making it up. But the first donation to the orphans' home was $1.50 from a man by the name of Jacob Plants from, I think, Buffalo, New York, who had grown up in foster care way back and knew that this would be something that would be valuable to kids. So the first donation to Bethany, and it wasn't even named Bethany in those days, was $1.50, which in 1863 was probably a significant amount of money. Anyway, they opened their home, and on September 21st, 1863, a 6-year-old girl by the name of Caroline Engel was brought to their front door. They lived in a row home in Center City, Philadelphia. And Caroline was the first child in what was to become the orphan's home. Now, if you've been to our office, there's a statue outside, and that is in honor and memory of Caroline as the first child that came to Bethany. It's actually modeled after one of our former employees' daughter, who was about the right age at the time. But that's Caroline, September 21st, 1863. At the end of the first year, they had 19 kids in their home. Now, I think 4 or 5 of them were their own, but 19 kids in a little row home. They knew they had outgrown the place. Now, some tragedy happened. Literally, they were preparing for their first anniversary in a celebration, and Christina Boehringer, the pastor's wife, got sick and died rather suddenly. They still held the anniversary, and I'll use the word celebration, but it was a little more of a somber occasion. But that day, Reverend Boehringer got sick, went to bed early, and 6 weeks later, he died. And actually, the story of Bethany probably should have ended right there. A Reverend Gantenbein and his wife, who were on the board, stepped forward and said, "This is important, and we're going to do it." And it continued. They outgrew the row home, started looking around, and on the outskirts of Philadelphia, out along the Delaware River, they found this old, decrepit mansion that they could afford and moved there. And, they had the Delaware River water, and, the air wasn't the greatest. They didn't have enough land to grow crops, but they did the best they could. They were there for 3 years. And at the end of that 3 years, they had 50 kids. And they had a couple extra individuals living, and helping in this old, dilapidated mansion. If you look at one of our history books, they have this lovely artist's rendering of, trees and a sidewalk up the middle and this mansion in the background. It looks nice. It's a drawing. We actually have a photograph of the mansion. Ain't that nice? If it was, they wouldn't have been able to afford it. I think I remember reading something like they had $12.75 in their treasury when they moved there. But they made it work with the support of churches and people like you, even way back then. They were there 3 years and basically outgrew that place, and they needed something bigger. And what they really wanted was a place with more land to grow crops, because in those days, if you didn't grow stuff, the kids didn't eat. They wanted cleaner air and cleaner water. And they looked all around eastern Pennsylvania, and they found this old hotel that was available on the South Mountain about a mile west of Womelsdorf. It was called Manderbach Springs Hotel. And this is an actual photograph. It's kind of beat up, but an actual picture of it. And I'll let this here. You can look at it a little later. It was $33,000. And I think if I recall what the history book said, there were 33 board members. I think they were all ministers. And so they all pledged $1,000. Now, I don't know that any of them could actually afford it, but they pledged it and were scrounging around. And eventually, they got it together. They purchased the place. I'm told that the minister in charge was a friend of the guy that owned the Pennsylvania and Reading Railroad, and he said, "I'll get you there." And they loaded them all on 2 passenger cars and 2 boxcars with all their earthly possessions. Now imagine 50 kids and all the adults with them with their pillowcases, with everything they own, getting on a train. And they left Philadelphia, and they went to the Womelsdorf train station, which doesn't exist anymore, sadly. But for those of you who have been to Bethany, it was right across the street from our stone gateway. It wasn't in Womelsdorf. It was right at the bottom of our hill. I actually remember the place. Yeah, I know, I'm old. Been around a while. It was torn down in the 70s, I think. But, they got off the train, and apparently people from supporting churches all along the railroad were out there, waving and greeting them. And of course, they were met by the mayor and the band in Womelsdorf and marched them up the hill. In 1867, we've been there ever since. Now, the hotel burned down in 1881. Fortunately, no loss of life. And they built another gigantic brick building that I call Old ADM. And Lee and Lynn and Kevin and I used to run around in the hallways in there. Actually, Kevin had a meeting with the front door, a really serious meeting. It was one of those doors with a whole bunch of panes of glass, and he was running, and somebody came the other way, and his hand went through the glass and cut him really severely up here, and it was a dire circumstance. Yeah, well, we all did that in those days. We were smarter then. And that was it. But I was there. I vividly remember that situation. After that, the panes were replaced with glass with wire in them. You get smarter. But this gigantic building. Now, over time, we evolved away from a gigantic building with bedrooms that would have 20 double beds. So maybe 40 kids in a room. And like I said, I'll leave these lay. You can look at them later. But, it wasn't exactly dormitory style the way we think of dormitories as 2 to a room yet. We had a real big room, a lot of kids. There were times when they had about 250 kids at the orphanage. Now, I failed to mention, when Pastor Bobringer found it, the name they gave it was was the Orphans' Home of the Shepherd of the Lambs. He took it from the newspaper that he was publishing. And it was a fitting name. In the mid-1880s, the board, and we actually have this in board records, discussed the fact that the name didn't fit well on a business card. And they needed something shorter because their business cards must have been this big. I don't know. I have a business card. Let me get it out of my pickup truck. Anyway, they wanted a different name. Now, I'm sure some of you know that the little hamlet of Bethany, not far from Nazareth, and not Nazareth, PA, Nazareth in Israel, was a place that Jesus would go as an adult when he needed quiet rest and recuperation. So it is very biblical where it came from. And, it's not a rare name. We have Bethany churches and other Bethany organizations. But that's why and how the name was selected. So in 1886 or something, somewhere around there, it was changed to Bethany Orphans' Home. Even in those days, kids weren't necessarily full orphans, but you had big families. And if the mother got sick and passed away, or the father in a work accident, these are common things based on our records, that they couldn't take care of all of the children. Sometimes the family of children would come to Bethany. Sometimes just the older family, the older kids would come to Bethany. Sometimes maybe the younger 2 or 3 or 4 would come to Bethany. But they would come to Bethany and they would stay as long as they needed to be there. They often, as they got older, could return to family because they were capable of going back and helping and providing for themselves. And it wasn't uncommon for kids to leave at 15 and certainly 16. They wouldn't necessarily, if they had family to return to, stay until they were 18. Very common. Today, still, for almost all of our kids, their goal in placement, and everybody has to have a goal, that's state regulation, is reunification with family. Almost every single one of them. Is it reasonable to have that goal for some of our kids? No. But that's the goal they want. That's the goal we work with, at least until we work with the family and the child, and we get to a point where we can demonstrate that this isn't going to happen. And then maybe they'll go with long-term foster care, and there's different names for it, or long-term care, and it could be staying at Bethany. It could be we could work them to go to a foster home if they're appropriate, and we do that. We have some kids that leave us to go live in communities with foster homes, and hopefully successfully, and we try to prepare them for that. But we also do something, and we've been doing it for many, many years, that we called independent living skills. And essentially what that means is we teach kids all the stuff they're going to need to know. And it's really practical, nuts and bolts, down-to-earth stuff. Every one of our kids does their own laundry. Now, if they don't know how to do it, our house parents teach them, but they're responsible to do their own laundry. They're responsible to clean their own room and make their bed. And in fact, if they go down to the bus in the morning and their bed's not made and their house parent calls the administrator and says they didn't make their bed, they'll have to go back and make their bed before they can get on the bus. If the bus driver's kind enough to wait, okay. If he's not, we'll take him to school and it'll cost him 50 cents because we're a taxi driver at that point. And they could have made the bus if they'd have just made their bed. The cold, hard consequences of life. They get pretty smart about that pretty quickly. The kids help to take care of their cottages. They have different chores in the cottages. Somebody's responsible for cleaning and sweeping the living room. Somebody's got the dishes. Somebody's got, one kid's got the washing, one kid's got the rinsing. One kid sets the table. One or two of the kids go to the main kitchen and bring the food back. Our kids, the majority of our meals are prepared in the main kitchen in our office building, but they eat in their cottages, family style, in smaller groups. And, of course, one kid has the dreaded bathroom chore, and hopefully not longer than a week at a time, but they usually survive. But then we do a lot of other stuff, too. We teach, I mentioned that we make them save money if they're working. If they're working, they get a checking account at Bethany. Now, it's not a real checking account, but we have a local bank that gives us checkbooks. And they write checks to our business office, and they have to get a cosign from one of the administrators to get money out of their account. So it's an actual check, and they run a balance. They learn how to balance a checkbook, and they have a checking account and savings account. We teach them how to use bus schedules. We teach them how to shop for themselves. We teach them how to cook. Now, as they get older, and we're talking about seniors, we then stop giving them all the hygiene products and things, toothpaste, shampoo, that we just have been giving them because they need it. We give them the money to go out and buy it, and they're responsible for going out, and we'll take them to the bus. And because of where we live, they even have to change buses to get to the Berkshire Mall. But we have them go on shopping trips to get things for themselves. And then they have to figure out how long this toothpaste and shampoo is going to last, and do I really want to get the Head & Shoulders when, the Redner's brand is half the price and does the same? We teach them that kind of stuff. Now, we can't force them to buy the cheap stuff. I buy the cheap stuff. I learned. We've done all of these things for quite a long time because we wanted them to at least be somewhat better prepared than when they came. Now, one of the other things that we do with all of our kids, and these days with our kids, in the old days they came from unfortunate family situations because oftentimes, parents not being capable of taking care of them because a parent died or whatever. Today, kids come to us from families that are horrible situations. They've been neglected and abused. In fact, 75% of our kids have been abused physically, and then half of those sexually, and certainly emotionally. But they've also been neglected, almost all of them. And neglect, in some ways, is almost more insidious than abuse. Abuse happens kind of infrequently, and otherwise they're there and they're doing okay, but the neglect kind of goes on all the time. There's nobody there to get them up. There's nobody there to feed them. There might not be any food in the house, on and on and on. So we try to prepare kids to go back to those kind of environments and make better decisions for themselves, be better prepared to deal with their own anger and frustration. And this all happens through counseling. Now, what I want to share with you is, as of last July 1st, we started a specific residential program. We have our regular residential program, and we teach them life skills. We have a short-term program. If they're around long enough, we teach them life skills. But we started something called independent living. And what it is it's a 4-stage program where they have to meet certain requirements, and we're teaching them stuff, and they have to take little tests, and they make progress along the way. When they get to stage 4, they will be living in an apartment in the local community. Now, we don't have anybody there yet, but we have some ready to enter stage 3. We're thinking by about October, we're going to need an apartment or two locally. And now we're going to be paying for the apartment. We're going to be supervising them. But talk about preparing them for independent living, they're going to be out there. Now, they're going to be 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. And if something really goes badly wrong, they're going to come back. We're going to take care of them. But this is a step-by-step process to get them out in the real world. And the next step after stage 4, and for however long, when they accomplish what they need to accomplish, they will be able to go get their own place and be on their own. Now, by that point, they should be working full-time. They should be done with school. But some of these kids might get there before they're even done with high school. So, we're excited about this program. We were hoping to have 10 kids in it by the end of the first fiscal year, which is June 30th. We are in a fiscal year, July 1 to June 30. We were hoping to have 10 kids in the program. With the economy the way that it's been, we actually had very low numbers for about 2.5 years. In fact, we had less than 40 kids in our residential program. Now, we used to have 75. It made it hard to even have a program. We're back up in the mid-60s, and 20 of those are in our independent living program. We were hoping for 10 in the first year. Counties like this program. They're seeing kids making real progress towards being independent, and it's working. So we're pretty excited about that because we haven't even been at it for a year.
Jonathan, with the economy the way it is, are you starting to, I know you said that at one point it was a point where kids were coming to Bethany so that it would actually help the family to be able to heal and to get back on track. And then you started seeing a lot more neglect and abuse going on. With the economy the way and the condition it is right now, are you starting to see now kids going back to that kind of original plan where they're coming back because the family's in desperate needs in regards to financial situations, or are you still seeing a lot more of the neglect and abuse?
Honestly, if families are just struggling financially, they're probably not going to end up at Bethany. It's a sad comment of the system, but the reason why we had fewer kids at Bethany for several years wasn't because there were fewer kids that needed us. It's because the state, it's a very complicated payment process, but the way it works, we actually contract with county agencies in Pennsylvania. We're a state administrated, county-run child welfare system. So the kids that are placed with us by county agencies. The county pays us a daily rate, and then they're reimbursed state and federal funds on kind of the back end of that. So a county pays us a daily rate. The majority of what they're paying us, they get back through state and federal funds. Sorry, folks, but whether it's state, federal, or local, you're helping to pay for that. That's just reality. And it is much more complicated than it needs to be. Now, having said that, and I think I might have shared this with you, Steve, what we are paid by county agencies, and it's a daily rate, and it varies a little bit depending on the program, but it doesn't cover our actual cost of care. So if they're paying us $150, and that's close to what it is, our actual cost of care is $186. So we're losing $36 a day for every child we have at Bethany, budget-wise. Now, I mentioned an endowment. We do have an endowment. That's there. Majority of it, about half of it is set aside for our operations. The other half is restricted to special stuff, like higher education. We use that. Unfortunately, with 2005 and 2008, the endowment isn't as big as it used to be because it shrank just like everybody else's. And then with today's interest rates, it makes less. So we're challenged even more because we used to get more from our endowment. Your giving is critically important to us because that helps us to make up the difference. We've been dipping into our endowment a little bit the last couple of years. Now, the numbers being up, we're floating, I'd say, kind of evenly right now. But when the numbers were at 40, we were struggling, quite honestly. So, I think that's something I want to leave with you, is that, we do take a loss every single day on every child we have. I'd love for counties to pay us what it actually costs. Right. We just can't. Somebody came to us, some kind of consultant, and basically what they said was, who would run a business like this? Well, if you're thinking business, nobody would, because you lose your shirt, go out of business. But that's not an option for the kids and families that we're trying to help. So we need to do this, and we need your help to do it. And one of the things I want to do in standing here is to say thank you, because you are one of those churches and some of those individuals that do that. And I want to assure you that it really is important to us. Real quick, 2 years ago when the state didn't pass a budget on time, it was 101 days late, we weren't paid by a county agency for 5 months. When I say a county, let me rephrase that. The county agencies that had kids with us didn't pay us for 5 months. We had to borrow money to make payroll. Oh. And the interest that borrowing cost us was on us. Counties weren't going to pay for that. And that sounds horrible. That's just the way the system works in Pennsylvania. That's the system that we have. Yeah.
Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Yes, questions.
I'm not sure. Are you connected with Walmersdorf Children's Home?
Well, that's where we are. Yeah,
they just changed the name.
They changed the name. Yeah, it was the Orphans Home of the. I didn't finish that part. The Orphans Home of the Shepherd of the Lambs became Bethany Orphans Home, which in the 1950s was changed to Bethany Children's Home. Yes, I'm from Bethany there, just south of Wilmsdorf a mile. Yep, just left there this afternoon.
Just a very, very short thing is that
Lutheran home at Topton, which is Lutheran, that was most likely a similar start.
It was. It started out as an orphanage. Probably similar to Bethany, changed into a children's home somewhere along the line. They have almost no children's programming anymore. I say almost.
Yeah,
it is a retirement facility. They do have a very small foster care program for adoption. And they do that because their charter requires it, or they probably would have closed it. So they do have a small program with a couple of foster homes, and they work toward getting kids adopted. They generally are much younger children.
Anything else? Yes, Kirby.
Now, obviously, not every children's home, orphanage is run the way you guys do. So the state payments would probably come closer, if not over, what the other orphanages or children's homes. What's the difference, if I can ask?
Well, no, that's a good question, a fair question. As a UCC-related organization, Bethany, we have a membership in CHSM, CHHSM. And you ought to all know what that is. I mean, I'm not saying you do, but you should know what that is, and I'm going to tell you. It's called the Council for Health and Human Service Ministries. And what it is it's the nationwide association of UCC people-serving institutions. So we actually are tied together with about 435 organizations across the United States who all come from UCC roots. And we meet together and we work together on things. We also have a membership, Bethany does, in a statewide association that's not church-related, but in other Pennsylvania child care agencies, most of whom are nonprofits. And I will tell you that there are very few agencies that get their actual cost of care. And those that deal with kids like ours, I would venture it's almost none. Because we all talk about it, we all deal with the same issues. We all have to do our own private fundraising if we want to actually stay alive, keep our doors open, and help kids. It is a challenge. The system's nuts, but that's...
Would the independent living skills be one of them?
Independent living skills, educational support. I'll give you some real simple, concrete examples. Essentially, what a county payment to us, what we receive for our per diem covers room and board, 3 meals, 2 snacks a day. The state requires that they actually tell you that. A roof over their heads, a safe place, beds, sheets, things like that. It does pay for house parents, and there's a little bit in there for therapy, but not much because most of that you need to do third-party billing, and we just don't do that because it's horrendous to try and do that. Our kids come with significant school deficits. Everybody thinks that public education is free. It is, but not all the extra support that our kids need. On average, they come a year behind in school. They've been truant. It's hard to do well when you don't go. When they come to Bethany, they're in school the next day, so truancy goes away, but they do have some educational deficits. We have a transitional classroom at our local school, Conrad Weiser, and it's designed to take our kids and help ease them into the school system because it's going to be different in the school they're coming from. We pay for that because we know it's that important for our kids to have. There's a teacher and an aide in that class. We pay for that. We have a specialized guidance counselor that's only there for the Bethany kids. He comes to our campus. He's in cottage meetings. He meets our kids and works with them. He is a resource for them. It's really important for our kids, but we pay his salary, or he wouldn't be there. Right. We then provide tutoring. We have 5 part-time tutors. We have tutoring 5 nights a week on all the school nights. We have tutoring that they can sign up and volunteer to go. And if they aren't passing any class, they go. They don't have a choice. They go to tutoring for that. We have a study hour. For every class they're not passing, they get an extra half hour of study time. There's an incentive to do better. What I will tell you is just what we provide in educational support runs about $220,000 a year. And that doesn't come from county agency. We can't get reimbursed for that.
And then one more question. So kids from all 67 counties in Pennsylvania can come there?
Theoretically, yes. I will tell you that we don't have contracts we have contracts with about 25 counties. Majority are east of the, I almost said Mississippi. Susquehanna, sorry. It's like the Mississippi, it's real big. There are a couple of counties west of the Susquehanna, almost said it again. Gettysburg, Adams County, Cumberland County, which is Carlisle. Occasionally Mifflin, Perry, some of those that are near Harrisburg. Fulton, we actually have a child from Fulton County. That's out west of Adams County. Nobody from Columbia. But recently, we've gotten kids from Pike County and Wayne County, that's getting pretty far away from us. But they heard about our independent living program. And they didn't have a contract with us and said, we'd like our child to come there. Sure, we'll sign a contract with them. So we could, but yeah, geographically, we pretty much hold to about the eastern half of the state. Now, one other example of things that aren't reimbursed. Birthday presents. Christmas presents.
Yes.
Your help in that regard is fantastic. But we don't get, every kid should have a birthday party, and they do. And they get a birthday cake. The cottages, the house parents, or the kids are making them a cake, and they have a party, and they get a couple of gifts.
I think the Bethany Christmas fund drive is probably one of the most traditional things I've ever heard of. When I was in seminary, the seminary actually collected, all the students collected for Bethany. And both years that I had to deliver the presents, we had ice storms both years.
Which is why I think they strong-armed me the last couple of years to go down and pick them up.
I wouldn't doubt it, because So anyway.
And it goes back historically, to white gifts. We've gotten away, but every once in a while people still bring gifts wrapped in white tissue paper. And I will tell you, for all of those years, we unwrap them because we have to know what it is. It's a crazy thing, but some people will still bring them that way. That's okay. We have fun opening them and wrapping them up again. So,
Jonathan, I really want to thank you. I know we could spend easily another half hour.
I was only partially kidding. I could talk for 2.5 hours.
Easily,
I just didn't want to do that to you.
Yeah,
so.
Bethany is is just a fantastic resource for our churches and for our communities, and we just want to thank you very much for all the work that you guys do. We appreciate your thank you for the support that the churches give you, but I think it's an awful lot more on your end. So we're so happy.
I will tell you, the first thing I want to say is we really do appreciate your help. It is important, and I have a wonderful staff that does all of this so that I can drive around the countryside and talk to people. So they make my job easy.
Great.
And I'm really appreciative of that.
Well, I'm very happy.
Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. We'll do that. Let us go to prayer. God of grace, we want to save the world, and yet sometimes we cannot even begin to save ourselves. And so we gather our thoughts during this time of prayer, and we pray for ourselves. Teach us how to rearrange our lives so that you would have us do what is your first priority. Grant us the courage to release what we desire and firmly grasp what you would have us do. Help us to step aside and outside of our comfort zones in your name. Grant us a willing heart to serve no matter where we are or what we do. Alert us to the needs of those around us, especially the children, and encourage us to meet that need in love, thereby being the church of Jesus Christ, our Lord, in whose name we pray. Amen.